The digital rain on the monitor screen was a constant, shimmering veil, each pixel a silent, falling tear. My office, a forgotten corner of existence above a perpetually damp alley, smelled of stale coffee and unfulfilled promises. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of light that dared penetrate the grime of the window, performing a slow, indifferent ballet. I watched them, much as I watched the endless, grainy feed from the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. This was my current kingdom, a sprawling concrete canvas painted with the transient lives of truckers and wayfarers. 8 screens, each a window into a different angle, showed the same muted drama, diesel fumes mingling with exhaust, the lumbering dance of 18-wheelers, the flicker of distant neon. I saw shadows stretch and shrink, the slow creep of dawn across asphalt, the occasional hurried transaction in a darkened cab. It was a world of quiet comings and goings, a symphony of anonymity, and it suited me perfectly. It was far removed from the sharp, blinding glare of my former life. A tremor ran through my hand, not from cold, but from the memory of a ghost. I traced the scar on my knuckles, a testament to a fight long lost, not with fists, but with truth and reputation. They had stripped me bare, left me with nothing but the tattered remnants of a name once respected. UserRH. Now, it was just a whisper in the echoing chambers of my own bitterness. The cheap plastic mug of lukewarm coffee sat beside a stack of old case files, yellowed at the edges like fading photographs. Each file a tombstone for a case I couldn't solve, or rather one I wasn't allowed to solve. My gaze drifted back to the screens, seeking solace in the predictable rhythm of the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. Life moved on, indifferent to my personal purgatory. Then, the shrill, insistent chime of my burner phone sliced through the quiet. I flinched, a visceral recoil. It was an old number, one I rarely used, one that belonged to a past I'd tried to bury under layers of cynicism and surveillance footage. The caller ID glowed, revealing only a string of numbers I recognized from a lifetime ago. It was the contact I'd hoped would never call again, a voice from the precinct, a ghost of a friend. I let it ring, watching the pixels blur, the red figure vanish into the cab. My chest tightened, a familiar vise. This was it, the inevitable pull back into the current that had nearly drowned me once before. I picked up on the 5th ring, my voice a gravelly rasp. "What do you want?" UserRH, the voice on the other end was clipped, urgent, devoid of the usual pleasantries. It belonged to an old colleague, a detective who had once stood by me, then watched me fall. "You seen the news?" I hadn't. My news came in monochrome from the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. "No, don't waste my time." Elias Thorne, the detective continued, ignoring my brusqueness. "Dead, he was found him this morning." The name hit me like a physical blow. Elias Thorne, the tech titan, the visionary, the man whose face was plastered on every billboard, whose company had redefined digital connectivity. Thorne was untouchable, a demigod of innovation, beloved by the city he'd helped build. My breath hitched. "Thorne, how?" "Shot." The detective's voice was grim, clean, professional. "In his penthouse, no forced entry. They want answers. UserRH, fast." My fingers tightened around the phone. Thorne, his empire touched everything from city infrastructure to personal data. This wasn't just a murder, it was an earthquake. "And you called me, why?" The words tasted like ash. I knew why. My reputation might be in tatters. But my mind, my particular brand of twisted insight, was still sharp. It was a weapon I'd sworn to keep sheathed. "Because you see things, UserRH, things others miss. This isn't a random hit. This is something else. Unofficially, of course, no one needs to know." I scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Unofficially, my name is Poison. You remember what happened last time? They tore me apart. I'm not diving back into that swamp." The image of the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone screens blurred before me, offering a fleeting escape. The anonymity, the distance, it was a fragile shield I wasn't ready to drop. "This is different," the detective pressed, a note of desperation creeping in. "Thorne had enemies, but none that would dare touch him like this. And the way it was done, it's too clean, too quiet, like a whisper in a hurricane." A flicker of something stirred within me, a phantom limb of my old self. The challenge, the puzzle, it was a dangerous siren song. My gaze drifted back to the monitors, the mundane ballet of the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone now seeming insignificant. Elias Thorne murdered, the city stunned. The detective knew it. I knew it. The hook was set, deep and painful. The taste of old blood, of unresolved injustices, was already on my tongue. The world had just reminded me that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. My quiet kingdom of surveillance and solitude was about to shatter. The digital ghosts of 18-wheelers still drifted across my screens in the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, their slow, lumbering dance a counterpoint to the sudden, sharp discord that had just ripped through the city's hum. Elias Thorne, murdered. The name echoed, a stone dropped into the quiet pool of my self-imposed exile. That phantom limb, my old self, twitched again, a forgotten nerve firing with an unwelcome jolt. The challenge, the intricate weave of a puzzle demanding unraveling, began to sing its dangerous, seductive song. I had spent years deafening myself to it, burying the echoes of a past case that had shredded my life. But Thorne's death, a titan fallen, was a clarion call. The shrill insistence of my burner phone, a device I kept only for the most unavoidable intrusions, shattered the fragile peace. The caller ID, a name I hadn't seen in years, glowed with an ironic luminescence: the detective. My fingers hesitated, hovering over the screen like a moth over a flame it knew would burn. To answer was to step back onto the precipice, to feel the vertigo of the abyss I had so carefully skirted. Yet the song of the puzzle, faint but growing, was already a whisper in my bones. I answered. UserRH, the voice on the other end, gruff and familiar, cut through the silence. Heard I was still. Around. Around, I echoed, my voice a rusty hinge. What do I want, detective? A sigh heavy with unspoken history crackled across the line. It's Thorne. I saw the news. We're swamped. And, well, I always had a knack for seeing what others didn't. The chief of operations is breathing down my neck. They want this solved yesterday, and they think I might be able to offer a fresh pair of eyes. The audacity of it, to ask for my help after they'd thrown me to the wolves. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. Fresh eyes, or a convenient scapegoat if it goes sideways. Look, UserRH, this isn't about old scores. This is big. Thorne was important. The city's on edge. Just come down, take a look. No strings, just a conversation. No strings, a lie as old as the city itself. But the bait was irresistible, a sliver of the truth I craved, wrapped in the promise of a puzzle. My gaze swept over the monitors one last time, the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone fading into a gray blur. The mundane had lost its hold. Send me the location, I said, the words tasting like ash and anticipation. The crime scene, a penthouse apartment high above the city's glittering sprawl, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum of ambition. The air was thick with the sterile scent of forensics and the unspoken tension of uniformed officers moving with practiced, weary precision. The detective met me at the perimeter, his face etched with the fatigue of a long night. He gestured vaguely at the opulent space. Clean hit. One shot, head, no forced entry. They're calling it a professional job, maybe a disgruntled associate, corporate espionage gone too far. I moved through the apartment, a ghost among the living, my senses peeling back the layers of official narrative. The victim, Elias Thorne, lay sprawled in his study, a tableau of sudden violence amidst curated luxury. The official photographers had already captured their sterile images, the evidence technicians cataloged their findings, but I sought the overlooked, the dissonant note in the symphony of the obvious. None. Security footage is clean. Apartment staff heard nothing. Thorne was alone, as far as we can tell. The detective's voice was flat, resigned. I knelt beside the body, my eyes tracing the lines of the room, the scattering of papers on Thorne's mahogany desk, the subtle shift of a curtain. My fingers brushed the edge of the desk, not seeking fingerprints, but the story the wood might tell. It was smooth, polished, but beneath my touch, a faint, almost imperceptible grit adhered to my fingertips. I brought my hand closer, sniffing. A faint, earthy scent like disturbed soil, but sharper with a metallic undertone. What's the preliminary on the projectile? I asked, not looking up. Standard, high caliber, clean exit wound, looks like a professional hit, as I said. I stood dusting my fingers subtly on my trousers, professional perhaps, but sloppy in one particular way. The detective raised an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Sloppy, Thorne was shot in his own study, no struggle, no alarm. That's precision. UserRH. Precision in the act, perhaps, I conceded, my gaze sweeping the room again, now with a sharper focus. But not in the preparation. Look around, detective. What do I see? He surveyed the room, his eyes passing over the same details I had. A rich man's study, a lot of expensive things. And what isn't here? I pressed, my voice a low hum. What doesn't belong in this pristine, climate-controlled tower? His brow furrowed. He was missing it, as they all would. It was too small, too mundane, too easily dismissed. I walked to a large, potted fern in the corner, its leaves a vibrant green against the muted tones of the room. I ran a finger along the rim of the terracotta pot, then held it up. This was richer, almost volcanic in its texture. This isn't just dirt, I stated, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. This is a specific type of soil rich in iron, common in areas with significant industrial runoff or certain geological formations. The kind I'd find near an old foundry or a specific type of dockyard. It was a faint, almost ghostly track, easily overlooked by eyes trained to spot blood spatter or shell casings. And they didn't just walk in from the street. This isn't city grime. This is specific. It suggests our professional killer didn't just step out of a black car. The official narrative of a clean, swift, corporate hit began to fray at the edges. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message, and the messenger had left a signature overlooked by everyone but me. The siren's song was now a full chorus, pulling me deeper into the labyrinth. The faint trail of dust, a smudge of charcoal on my fingertip, felt like a whisper from the grave. The detective's gaze, once fixed on the official narrative, now held a nascent tremor, a dawning unease that mirrored my own. A clean, swift hit. No, this was a deliberate scrawl across the canvas of a meticulously planned crime, a message etched in the very dust of the victim's demise. The messenger had left a signature, indeed, a taunt aimed not just at the deceased, but at anyone foolish enough to look closer. My cynicism, a familiar cloak, tightened around me. The city, a sprawling beast of glass and ambition, hummed with its usual indifferent rhythm, but for me the melody had shifted. It was a dirge, a prelude to something far more intricate than a simple corporate purge. Thorne, the tech titan, had been a king in this concrete jungle, and kings rarely fell without a tremor through the entire court. The detective, a man burdened by the weight of procedure, had offered me a lifeline, a sliver of access to the formal investigation, despite my tarnished badge. He knew, I think, that some threads were too fine for the blunt instruments of officialdom. My first move was a dive into the digital heart of Thorne's empire, Nexus Dynamics. The building itself was a monument to sleek ambition, all polished chrome and muted light. Inside, the air thrummed with the low hum of servers and the muted clatter of keyboards. I moved through the open-plan offices like a ghost, my eyes scanning faces, my ears attuned to the subtle currents of fear and ambition. Employees, a hive of focused intellect, glanced up, then quickly away, their expressions a mix of forced composure and underlying tension. Whispers like eddying currents snaked through the cubicles' hushed conversations about the project, always the project, spoken with a reverence bordering on dread. He was obsessed. A junior programmer, nervously adjusting his glasses, confided to me in a deserted break room, his voice barely a murmur. Worked day and night, said it would change everything. Privacy, security. He said it would redefine it all. He wouldn't elaborate, only shivered and returned to his terminal, leaving me with a tantalizing echo of a grand, yet terrifying vision. My old contact, a digital ghost who navigated the city's data streams with the grace of a phantom, had managed to slip me a fragmented data packet, an encrypted file that glowed with an ominous, impenetrable light. It was a scrap, a breadcrumb from the heart of Nexus Dynamics, hinting at a network of servers far deeper than the public-facing ones, a labyrinth of data protected by layers of proprietary encryption. The name of the file, simple and stark, was Aegis Protocol. A shield or a weapon? The lead from the detective, a tip regarding a disgruntled former executive who'd been summarily dismissed months ago, drew me out of the gleaming corporate tower and into the city's grittier underbelly. The executive, a man named Sterling, was known for his late-night habits, particularly his penchant for clandestine meetings in the less scrutinized corners of the city. My informant, a grimy-faced man who smelled of stale coffee and desperation, pointed me to the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. It was a vast expanse of asphalt, scarred by oil stains and tire marks, perpetually bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glow of sodium lamps. The air hung thick with the diesel fumes and the distant drone of idling engines. Security cameras, perched on tall poles, cast wide, unblinking eyes over the rows of sleeping rigs and the occasional late-night traveler. I parked my beat-up sedan in a far corner, the engine ticking as it cooled. I pulled my collar tighter, my gaze sweeping the lot. Sterling was supposed to meet me here, drawn by the promise of information regarding Thorne's final days, and a significant sum of cash. I saw him then, a gaunt figure hunched over a steaming cup of coffee near a vending machine, his eyes darting nervously. As I began to approach, a black sedan, its windows tinted to an opaque obsidian, glided silently into the lot. My instincts, honed by years of walking the razor's edge, screamed a warning. Sterling saw it too. His head snapped up, his face draining of color. He dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the asphalt. Before I could reach him, a figure emerged from the black sedan, moving with a predatory grace. Not a word was spoken. The figure simply seized Sterling, dragging him towards the car with a terrifying efficiency. Sterling let out a choked cry, a sound quickly swallowed by the vastness of the lot. I broke into a run, my hand instinctively reaching for the worn grip of my sidearm, but they were too fast. The sedan's rear door slammed shut with a definitive thud. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as it peeled out of the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, disappearing into the arterial network of the city's highways. My lead, had been snatched away like a wisp of smoke. This wasn't just a corporate rival or a disgruntled employee. This was an organized force, a formidable unseen adversary that moved with an almost surgical intent, leaving no trace but the lingering taste of fear. The Aegis Protocol, Thorne's controversial project, and now Sterling's abduction, the pieces were beginning to coalesce, forming the grim outline of a conspiracy far grander and more dangerous than I had initially dared to imagine. Not again. The charcoal dust, a faint smirch on my fingertip, had been a dissonant note in the symphony of a clean hit. The detective, though still bound by the rigid chords of protocol, had heard it too, a subtle discord that promised a different melody. My own gut, a seasoned instrument of cynicism and suspicion, vibrated with a low hum. This wasn't the work of a phantom, a ghost in the corporate machine. This was the clumsy human touch of an amateur or perhaps a professional trying too hard to look like one. The deliberate scrawl across the canvas of a carefully constructed lie. My office, a cramped testament to past glories and present grime, became my war room. Hours bled into each other, fueled by cold coffee and a relentless need to connect the disparate threads. I started with the dust itself. Not just charcoal, but a specific particulate, finer than artist's charcoal, coarser than industrial soot. It spoke of a specialized process, perhaps in manufacturing or even a niche trade. I cross-referenced the CEO's known associates, business ventures, even his hobbies, against any entity that might generate such a signature. Nothing. The dust was an anomaly, an outsider. The breakthrough, when it finally arrived, was less a flash of brilliance and more the slow, agonizing grind of attrition. I widened my net, pulling in surveillance footage from every camera within a 2-mile radius of the CEO's penthouse, not just from the night of the murder, but the day before and the morning after. Days became a blur of pixelated frames, searching for anything out of place. A delivery truck, its rear fender barely visible in a blurry corner frame, bore a faint, almost invisible gray smudge. My breath hitched. The truck wasn't making a delivery to the CEO's building. It was parked, idling a block away for an unusually long time. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the truck's registration, its company affiliation. A small, independent outfit specializing in bespoke metalwork, often using specialized carbon-based compounds for finishing. The dust, it fit. The pieces clicked with a satisfying, if unsettling, precision. The next step was to track the truck. Its digital footprint, though faint, led me down a winding path of delivery logs and GPS pings. I found its regular route, its usual stops. One particular stop, a desolate stretch in the early hours, drew my attention. The truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. This zone, a nexus of weary travelers and transient commerce, offered a wealth of low-resolution eyes. I spent another sleepless night, sifting through the grainy monochrome until I found it. The truck at 3 a.m. 2 days after the murder. The driver, a hulking figure with shoulders like a bull, emerged from the cabin. He met with another individual, smaller, almost furtive. A quick exchange, a small package. The smaller figure then slipped away into the pre-dawn gloom. My internal ledger began to balance. The driver was my primary suspect, a hired hand likely. The smaller figure, an intermediary. The CEO's murder, not a random act of violence, but a meticulously planned hit with a clumsy yet traceable dust trail. I found the driver. His name, a common one, belonged to a man with a string of minor offenses, petty theft, assault, but nothing that suggested a professional killer. He lived in a rundown apartment above a sputtering laundromat, a life far removed from the polished steel and glass of the CEO's world. I watched him for 2 days, a phantom in his periphery, observing his routines, his nervous glances over his shoulder. He carried the weight of something heavy, something he hadn't fully processed. The confrontation was in a desolate alleyway behind his apartment, the air thick with the smell of stale garbage and exhaust fumes. I cornered him, stepping out from the shadows like a memory he couldn't shake. His eyes, wide with a flicker of recognition and raw fear, confirmed my suspicions. "The dust," I began, my voice a low growl, "from your truck. It was at the CEO's building. You were there." He blanched, his face draining of color. I just made a delivery, and the package you exchanged in the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, that wasn't part of your regular route, was it? I pressed, each word a hammer blow against his crumbling facade. He cracked. The confession tumbled out, a flood of fear and desperation. He admitted to being paid to make a problem disappear. Not the CEO, not explicitly, just a problem. He'd been given a key card and access code and told to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He hadn't meant to kill anyone, he stammered, his eyes darting, pleading. He'd panicked when the CEO had woken. The charcoal dust. He'd been working late, loading specialized carbon filters onto his truck and hadn't changed his clothes. A sloppy mistake, a detail he hadn't thought important. For a moment, a fleeting, treacherous moment, I felt it. The familiar rush of closure, the satisfaction of a case solved. The killer identified, the motive clear, the loose ends tied. It was a sweet, intoxicating siren song, a melody I hadn't heard in years. I had my man. The initial narrative, the clean hit, was a smokescreen for a panicked amateur. A false victory shimmering like a mirage. Then he spoke again, a detail offered not as a confession, but as a plea for leniency. They said it was important for the election, for the city. The words hung in the stale air, thick and heavy. The election, the city. My false victory shattered like cheap glass. This wasn't just a disgruntled employee or a rival. He'd only ever met her once. He didn't know her name. Only that she spoke with the smooth cadence of someone accustomed to power. Someone who moved in circles far beyond his world of metalwork and late-night deliveries. This man was a pawn, a disposable piece in a game I was only just beginning to comprehend. The conspiracy, far from being contained, had just unfurled its monstrous wings. Political figures. The ghost of another case, another false victory, another set of eyes that had lied to me, promising resolution only to deliver ruin. The memory of the headlines, the accusations, the career that had imploded with a sickening crunch. The shame, a dull ache beneath my ribs, flared into a sharp, piercing pain. I had been so sure then, just as I had been sure now. The feeling of the ground shifting beneath my feet, the vertigo of betrayal. It threatened to consume me, to drag me back into the mire of my own past. My hands clenched, gripped tight. No, not again. Not this time. The words still echoed, a chill breath on the back of my neck. The election, the city. My mind, a fractured mirror, pieced together the fragments. Thorne's murder wasn't a solitary act of avarice or spite. It was a ripple, a tremor in the city's concrete heart, tied to something far grander and far more sinister than I had dared to imagine. The intermediary from the truck stop. A ghost from a different lifetime, yet suddenly solidifying into the present. My fingers, restless and raw, typed a command into the dusty terminal. The screen flickered, then resolved, displaying the granular footage from the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone. Hours of static vehicles and blurred figures flickered past, a mundane tableau of transient lives. My eyes, however, sought a specific shadow, a particular gate. I fast-forwarded, rewound, zoomed in, the pixelated world a puzzle I was desperate to solve. And then there he was, a man emerging from the passenger side of a nondescript sedan. His face turned away, but his posture, the slight hitch in his left shoulder, the way he adjusted the collar of his jacket, it was a phantom limb sensation, a recognition deeper than sight. The intermediary, the one who had vanished, leaving behind only the wreckage of my career. I watched him approach Thorne's vehicle, a brief exchange, a gesture, then a small package changing hands. My breath hitched. The package. It wasn't the data chip I'd been told to search for. It was a sleek, black device, no bigger than a thumb drive, yet radiating an ominous significance even through the grainy footage. And then as the intermediary turned, for a fleeting, impossible second, the camera caught a sliver of his profile, just enough. The sharp line of his jaw, the scar above his left eye, a cruel slash I remembered from a different investigation, a different life. It was him. Thorne, the tech CEO, the paragon of innovation, was connected to him. And by extension, to my past. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stripping away the thin veneer of detachment I had clung to. This wasn't just a case to clear my name for the city. This was a war for my very soul. I slammed my palm onto the desk, the cheap wood groaning in protest. The city's ambition, Thorne's secret project, my own ruined reputation, they were all threads in the same grim tapestry. Thorne's project, whatever its true nature, was not just about profit or progress. It was about control, political control, the election. Before I could even process the full implications, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the alley below my office window. A second later, the glass shattered inward, showering my desk with crystalline shards. Instinct, honed by years of walking the city's treacherous edges, screamed danger. I dropped to the floor, rolling beneath the heavy oak desk, the splinters biting into my skin. Another shot, this one tearing through the wall where my head had been moments before. They knew I was close. They were sending a message, or more likely, silencing a loose end. This wasn't some veiled threat, it was a direct declaration of war. My breath hitched, not in fear, but in a surge of pure, unadulterated resolve. The official channels, the carefully constructed alliances, they were all compromised. I was on my own, fully rogue. I crawled to the back of the office, retrieving a worn leather bag I kept stashed for emergencies. My burner phone, a few spare clips, a lock-picking set, the tools of a ghost. I scaled the rickety fire escape, the cold metal biting into my gloved hands, and disappeared into the labyrinthine alleys, leaving the shattered window and the remnants of my fragile life behind. I knew one person who might understand the digital tendrils of this conspiracy, a former acquaintance, a network specialist with a reputation for untangling the most intricate digital webs who operated on the fringes, trading secrets for solace. He sat hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by its pale glow, fingers dancing across the keyboard. He looked up, his eyes, magnified by thick lenses, narrowed slightly. "UserRH," he greeted, his voice a low hum devoid of surprise. "You look like you've wrestled a ghost and lost." "Wrestled a ghost and found its puppeteer," I corrected, sliding into the booth opposite him. The scent of fear and desperation clung to me like a shroud. "I need you to look at something." I slid Thorne's encrypted drive across the table. Thorne's pet project, he's connected to my old case, the vanished data. The network specialist picked up the drive, his brow furrowing as he connected it to his own heavily modified machine. He typed, his fingers a blur, then paused, a low whistle escaping his lips. "This isn't just a pet project, UserRH. This is an ecosystem, not just any data, mind you. Behavioral patterns, electoral models, predictive analytics based on public sentiment, private communications. Everything. It's designed to influence, to shape, to control narratives at scale. And the vanished data from your past case? I'd wager it wasn't vanished at all. It was absorbed. The core architecture for this Project Chimera probably began with that very dataset." My stomach clenched. The vanished data was the crucial evidence that had implicated a powerful political faction, data that mysteriously disappeared, leading to the collapse of my investigation and the end of my career. It wasn't lost. It was stolen, weaponized. Thorne hadn't just been building a tech empire. He'd been constructing a digital puppet master, pulling the strings of the city itself. The city. The words solidified into a terrifying truth. My past, Thorne's death, the city's future, all were inextricably bound, woven into the insidious design of Project Chimera. The stakes had not merely risen, they had become existential. The air in the makeshift hub was thick with the hum of processors and the ghosts of forgotten journeys. My ally, the quiet hacker with eyes that saw beyond the screen, worked feverishly, fingers a blur across the keyboard. We were nestled in a corner of the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, a place of transient shadows and constant, low-grade scrutiny. Its cameras, I knew, were easily bypassed. Their feeds a river I'd learned to navigate in my former life. Now they were a shield, a cloak of digital static. Thorne hadn't just been building a private network for the tech CEO, I realized, the words from the previous night echoing in my mind. He was constructing a scaffold, a hidden architecture for something far more insidious. The vanished data, the very evidence that had fractured my career, scattering the shards of my reputation across the city. It wasn't merely lost. It was the foundation. Thorne, in his twisted brilliance, had been preparing to expose the architects of my downfall, or perhaps to join them. The thought was a bitter draught, a poison I had to swallow to see clearly. "Almost there, UserRH," the hacker murmured, his voice a strained whisper. "This encryption. It's like a living thing, adapting, learning." Sweat beaded on his brow, catching the blue glow of the monitor. He spoke of algorithms as if they were sentient beings, and in this digital war, perhaps they were. A flicker on a secondary screen. A map of the city overlaid with shifting red heat signatures caught my eye. The hunters were closing in. Their digital footprints, once faint and distant, now pressed against the edges of our temporary sanctuary. They were not looking for Thorne anymore. They were looking for what he left behind, and by extension for me. The hacker let out a sharp gasp, a sound like a caught breath. There, a breach, a partial decryption. My gaze snapped to the main screen. Lines of code, once an impenetrable fortress, now yielded fragmented truths. Names began to coalesce, not of corporations, but of individuals. Familiar names whispered in the hushed corridors of power, etched into the city's very bedrock. They were not merely connected. They were interwoven, a tapestry of influence and control. Not just corporate espionage, not just political corruption. Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon a conspiracy, he had been swallowed by a leviathan, and now I was in its belly. The vanished data wasn't just about a political faction, it was about their initial foray, their test run. My past wasn't just a ghost, it was a prelude. "We need more," I stated, my voice low, firm. "More processing power or a backdoor, something to cut through this faster." The red signatures on the secondary screen pulsed, growing bolder, closer. Time was a luxury we no longer possessed. The hacker shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "It's too complex. This isn't just a server farm, it's a distributed network hidden in plain sight. We need access to something. Something with more reach, more leverage." My mind raced, sifting through the dregs of my former life. There was only one option, a contact I'd sworn I would never call again. But his prices were rarely monetary. They were paid in favors, in risks, in the very fabric of one's soul. "I know who can help," I said, the words tasting like ash. "But it comes with a cost, a heavy one." The hacker looked at me, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "We're already paying UserRH in time, in blood." I pulled out an old, untraceable burner phone, its plastic casing worn smooth from years of disuse. But the alternative was letting this cabal, this Project Chimera, tighten its grip on the world. My name might never be cleared, but I could prevent the truth from being buried forever. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "UserRH, a ghost from the old days, what brings you back to the land of the living?" "I need access," I stated, cutting to the chase, "to a network, a low whistle of appreciation or perhaps alarm." "That's a tall order even for me," he replied, a hint of genuine concern in his tone. "The ones I speak of, they guard their secrets with more than just encryption, Thorne's partial data, and I have nothing left to lose." A long pause stretched between us, filled only by the distant rumble of trucks and the frantic clicking of the hacker's keyboard. "Midnight, alone, and bring a sample, proof of concept." He hung up, leaving me with the dial tone and the weight of my decision. I looked at the hacker, who had paused his work, sensing the shift in the air. "I'm going to Pier 17, I told him. "You keep digging. Find anything else you can, anything to give us an edge." He nodded, his eyes grim. "Be careful, UserRH." And now I was playing it with him, hoping to leverage one dangerous contact against an even more dangerous cabal. The clock was ticking, and the game had just begun. The stale breath of diesel and distant city hum filled the air, a metallic tang that clung to the damp night. I was a ghost among the skeletal trees bordering the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, my breath a visible plume in the frigid air. The old contact, a silhouette of shifting loyalties, was late. Each passing minute stretched taut, a violin string before the snap. My hand, hidden within my worn trench coat, clasped the small, cold device, the key to unlocking this charade. I imagined the data within it, a silent scream of truth waiting to be unleashed. My gaze swept across the grimy expanse of the lot, a mosaic of idling trucks and slumbering vehicles. The surveillance cameras mounted on rusting poles felt like eyes burning into my back, yet I knew their blind spots, their predictable arcs. Years ago, I'd mapped them all, an obsessive ritual of a life I'd thought was behind me. A black sedan, too clean for this place, too quiet, finally drifted into view, its headlights cutting through the gloom. It parked far from the others, a deliberate island in a sea of forgotten journeys. The driver, the old contact, emerged, a figure cloaked in shadows and a history of bad decisions. His eyes, even from this distance, held a familiar glint of avarice and fear. He walked towards me, his gait a mixture of swagger and caution. "I have it," he rasped, his voice a low growl that barely cut through the distant rumble of an 18-wheeler. "Do I have the access codes?" I countered, my voice flat, betraying none of the hurricane churning within. He produced a small, encrypted card, its surface reflecting the sickly yellow light. "One-time use. It gets I into the old foundry. The main server room is on the 3rd floor behind the north-facing wall. They're expecting a data transfer from an offshore account. I'll piggyback that." A knot tightened in my gut. "They're expecting me." A cruel smile touched his lips, a flicker of betrayal already etched on his face. "Not exactly. They're expecting the transfer, the rest. That's on UserRH. I just opened the door." He tossed the card. "You promised." "When the truth is out," I answered, my eyes locking onto his. "When the city knows, not a moment before." I turned, leaving him stewing in his greed. The true nature of this transaction, the depth of his compromise, finally crystallized. He wasn't just a go-between. He was a gatekeeper, willing to sell me out for a quick score. The sting of it was familiar, a ghost of past wounds. The abandoned foundry loomed on the horizon, a hulking skeleton against the bruised sky, its broken windows like vacant eyes. It was a short, tense drive from the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, the old contact's instructions echoing in my mind. I found the service entrance he'd described, a corroded steel door tucked away from the main road, almost swallowed by overgrown brambles. My flashlight beam cut through the black, dancing across cobweb-draped machinery and the dust-choked remnants of a forgotten era. This wasn't just an infiltration, it was a descent. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the air growing heavier with each step, a premonition of the confrontation to come. The third floor, north-facing wall. I ascended a crumbling stairwell, my hands scraping against the rough concrete, the metallic tang of fear rising in my throat. Then I heard it voices. Muffled low but undeniably present, they were here, waiting. I crept closer, pressing myself against the grimy wall, peering around a bent sheet of corrugated iron. Two figures stood before a bank of humming servers, their backs to me. The other. It was the civic leader, the one who had publicly mourned the tech CEO, the one who had called for swift justice. His voice, usually a polished instrument of public reassurance, was now a viper's hiss. "The transfer is almost complete," the enforcer rumbled, his voice devoid of warmth. Our friend on the outside ensured the connection. The old contact hadn't just opened the door, he had led me into a trap. This was the betrayal, sharp and unforgiving. The reveal hit me with the force of a physical blow. The civic leader wasn't just complicit, he was the architect, the puppet master pulling the strings of this entire gruesome symphony. The CEO's death wasn't about corporate rivalry, it was about silencing a threat to his carefully constructed empire of lies. My device, the one meant to transmit the proof, felt heavy in my hand. They were about to erase everything. I had to act. I burst from my hiding spot, the metal sheet clattering against the concrete, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous space. "I won't erase anything," I shouted, my voice raw, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and desperation. Both men spun, startled. The enforcer's hand instinctively went to his waistband. The civic leader's face, usually a mask of benign authority, twisted into a snarl of pure malice. "UserRH," he hissed, his eyes narrowed to slits. "How? Inconvenient." "The game's over," I responded, stepping into the dim light, my hand raising the small device. "The world's about to know who I really are." "Fool," the civic leader spat. "I think a little gadget can bring down what I've built." He gestured to the enforcer. "Deal with him." The enforcer charged, a mountain of muscle and controlled violence. I didn't have time for a fair fight. My only chance was to transmit the data. I darted backwards, scrambling over discarded machinery, the enforcer's heavy footsteps thudding behind me. I needed a clear line, a moment of reprieve. I spotted an old conduit pipe running along the wall directly above the server bank. A reckless idea sparked in my mind. With a desperate leap, I grabbed the pipe, swinging my legs up, my boots finding purchase on the rusted metalwork. The pipe groaned under my weight, threatening to give way. The enforcer paused, momentarily thrown by my aerial maneuver. This was my event. I scrambled along the pipe, precariously balanced, aiming for the main server rack, my fingers fumbling with the transmission device. Below me, the civic leader watched, his face a contorted mask of fury. "He's trying to upload, stop him." The enforcer roared, grabbing a heavy metal bar from the floor. He swung it, aiming for the pipe, intending to bring me crashing down. The first blow rang out, a deafening clang that reverberated through the factory, shaking the pipe violently. I nearly lost my grip, my fingers screaming with strain. But I held on. With a surge of adrenaline, I jammed the device into the nearest open port on the server rack, a frantic prayer on my lips. The small indicator light on the device began to blink rapidly at first, then settling into a steady, urgent pulse, data flowing. Another blow from the enforcer, closer this time, causing the pipe to buckle. Dust rained down. I felt a sharp pain in my side as I scraped against a jagged edge of metal. But the device was still blinking. The truth, fragmented and hard-won, was escaping into the digital ether, a beacon in the encroaching night. "No!" The civic leader shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged for the server, but it was too late. The data was out. The pipe gave way beneath me with a deafening screech of tortured metal. I plunged downwards, twisting in the air, landing hard on my side amidst a pile of discarded industrial refuse, a sharp pain lancing through my ribs. The device clattered, lost in the debris, my breath caught in my throat, a ragged gasp. But the blinking light, a tiny, persistent pulse, was gone. The transmission was complete. The enforcer was on me in an instant, his heavy boot pinning my arm. He knew I had one even from the dust and pain of my defeat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, not police. His sirens, a significant personal cost indeed. I had exposed their truth, but now I was exposed too, broken and vulnerable in the heart of their domain. The sirens crescendoed, Not the familiar two-tone wail of uniformed officers, but a discordant symphony of a dozen different vehicles, converging. My lungs burned, air thick with the metallic tang of fear and the dust of their crumbling domain. I stood, exposed, a raw nerve, as the heavy doors of the cavernous space rumbled open, revealing not their enforcers, but a sudden, blinding flash of strobes. Not police, indeed. This was the counter-assault, the orchestrated disruption I had gambled my last shred of self on. Figures in dark, tactical gear swarmed in, efficient and silent, their movements rehearsed. They were not there for me. They moved past, a blur of purpose, towards the bewildered remnants of the network. The man who had just raised his hand, the architect of my ruin, stood frozen, his eyes wide with a sudden horror as his carefully constructed world imploded around him. I watched, a phantom limb aching with the weight of years, as his subordinates were systematically disarmed, their communication devices crushed under heavy boots. The air, once thick with his authority, now crackled with the static of defeat. A hand, surprisingly gentle, touched my shoulder. My old contact, a silhouette against the chaos, spoke without turning. "I did it, UserRH, they're all here, every last spider in the web." The words felt hollow, a trophy made of ash. I had set the trap, baited it with my own precarious freedom, and now the predators were caught, but the cost. The true cost settled on me like a shroud. Days later, the city still hummed with the aftershocks. The official narrative spun by the authorities was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. A rogue corporate faction, a network of illicit influence, a tragic CEO, and a few high-profile arrests. My name, UserRH, was mentioned in hushed tones, a footnote in the carefully curated story, vaguely instrumental in bringing justice to light. Not fully cleared, not truly redeemed in the public eye, but the shadow of disgrace had lessened its suffocating grip. The truth in its rawest form was too vast, too corrosive for public consumption. My old contact met me in the truck stop parking lot surveillance zone, a temporary, nondescript hub carved out of an abandoned service garage. Screens glowed, displaying a mosaic of data, financial transactions, encrypted communications, grainy images of now-detained figures. They ran deep, the contact murmured, gesturing to a particularly complex flowchart on one monitor. The CEO, he stumbled onto their money laundering operation tied to the city's infrastructure projects. He tried to go public and they made an example. My past case, the one that broke UserRH, it was their dry run, a test of how easily they could manipulate the system, plant evidence, discredit a tenacious investigator. I was the perfect scapegoat, my reputation already frayed. The words were a bitter bomb. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. They had not merely destroyed my career, they had weaponized my very existence. I traced the lines of the flow chart, seeing the connections, the hidden hand in the city's every pulse. The network wasn't just about money, it was about control. Control over judges, over zoning permits, over the very fabric of urban life. The CEO's death was merely the latest thread in a tapestry of quiet corruption woven over decades. We dismantled the core, the contact continued, but the roots, they're still there, waiting for new ground to take hold. I nodded, the weight of that truth heavier than any personal vindication. The battle was won, yes, but the war for something resembling justice felt eternal, a ceaseless tide against an unyielding shore. The apartment felt different, cleaner, as if the grime of past injustices had been partially scrubbed away, but the scars remained, etched deep into my psyche. I was not the same UserRH who had stumbled into this labyrinth, burdened by guilt and cynicism. My name was no longer synonymous with failure, not entirely. I had faced my demons, confronted the architects of my ruin, and brought a measure of their empire crashing down, but the fight, it was never truly over. It merely shifted, adapting to the new landscape. My role in it, too, was forever changed. A private investigator, yes, but with eyes that saw too much, and a spirit irrevocably marked by the fires I had walked through. The night stretched before me, a canvas of uncertainty, yet for the first time in years, a faint, resolute ember flickered in the deepest chambers of my being. I was UserRH and I was still here, watching, waiting.